So today, I'm here to speak a little bit from my own experience, but I'm also bringing on a couple of friends of mine. And so today I have Becky with us. Becky is actually a friend of mine from some previous work, and I've been trying to get her on to join us for a while, just to join us for chats. So instead of doing that, I just said, you know what, come on and be a guest with me. So I'm pretty excited about that. So Becky, do you want to tell us a little bit about your origin story? So just before we do that, I want to let you guys know what we're talking about today. Our plan was to talk a little bit about some of the things happening in the industry as far as ageism. You can see I'm getting there. I got the silver. I've been feeling it for a little while, and so that's kind of going to be our primary focus today. So all of you, please feel free to jump in and comment on it. And if somebody feels so inclined that they want to jump on screen, just let me know too, and you can jump on and talk about your story. But I'm going to introduce you to Becky Nusbaum first, and Becky, take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Toddi. Just took me a little bit to get that mute button down. So yes, my experience, fortunately, I was lucky enough to work with Toddi on some past projects. I work as an instructional designer, contract basis for CSU Global. I teach a couple of computer science classes for Montana State University. We're in Colorado, but we're in Montana for 8 years. So I'm also finishing my education doctorate in adult and higher ed through Montana State. And not to jump too much into the content of today, but as a 47-year-old student and in the workforce, employment, I'm working contract right now. I've seen some of these components and challenges and so forth. So I just think it's exciting to talk about some of the challenges, some of the advantages to, different generations and all of that. So, and I'm excited to be a part of TLDC and my first experience. So thanks so much to each of you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, it took getting you to come on as a guest to finally get you to join us, which I think is awesome. And so as well, I have another friend that I worked with in Massachusetts who should join us in a little bit. His name is Steve, but he'll be on kind of a limited time window. So when Steve joins us, we'll hand it over to him because he has a really interesting story as well. So actually, Becky, what is your origin story? We normally talk about origin stories here. Like, how did you get into this industry? What started you here?
Boy, great question. So I think in any kind of communications that I'm in, and I feel like it was kind of flipped for that I was in technology before I was in education. So I was in human resources for years. Technology, I went back to school for my undergraduates way back again. We're talking about age, so 90s. My undergrads were in communications and philosophy. So in 1999, I went back to school through the Art Institute and got my associates in web design development. Worked for 10 years for the Center for Legal Studies, administering their online education and platform. Which I was working from home, so I would dial in with AOL. VPN'd in, bring everyone in, and there's this whole transformative online education. We're moving away from fax correspondence with all the universities. So just to give you an idea, so that'll really kind of give you, the idea of my age. But in any event, then I went back for my master's and started teaching in Montana and have really enjoyed that connection between education and technology. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting industry. We all have different origin stories, and it's always interesting to hear from people. How did you get into this? I never planned to be a trainer. I don't think there's the book The Accidental Trainer. I don't think I ever planned on being a trainer or an instructional designer. I had no idea what that was. I started working with Raytheon as a technical writer, and then somebody approached me and said, "Hey, I really don't want to work full time, so do you want to do my job?" That's how I ended up doing this. So it's pretty cool.
Well, funny how all the paths, come together as they're meant to be, but doesn't make sense as
well. And I've never been sorry. Seriously, it's a field that I really love. So I actually kind of started into this field fairly late, I consider, in my career, but I really enjoyed doing it. So it's interesting because I was doing a little bit of reading, and there's some fascinating articles out there that have been published, like the last of 2017. Early 2018. And just to jump into this a little bit. By the way, I put my glasses on so I can see, because that's one of those things that happens to you when you get older. You need reading glasses. They say that right now, and this was a 2018 article, that 20% of the workers that are in the workforce are either working right now or planning on working beyond what we consider the traditional retirement age. And they're saying 65 is the retirement age. I always hope that 65 is not my retirement age, but I mean, I don't want to just not work either. Not working is boring. And that's actually one of the biggest numbers that we've had in the workforce. It's continued to stay since the past World War II. So right after World War II, we saw people staying in the workforce as well because we were lacking a lot of the skill sets that we needed in the industries. So just past World War II into the 50s, a little bit into the 60s, people stayed a little bit longer in the workforce. But for the last 40, 50 years, it's been more traditional for people to get out of the workforce at 65. But the trend now is to not do that, which I think is really interesting. And the interesting piece of that for me is not just that people are staying, but that it's getting harder and harder for us to find like meaningful full-time work. So there's a dichotomy there. And there are some studies out there that say that this particular group of people, and it's over 40. So however you all identify yourself, whether you identify yourself as an older worker at 40 or 50 or 60, that's kind of up to you, but it still affects us all like from the 40s on. And that's what they're saying is that this kind of actually starts in the 40s, that you start getting categorized as an older worker. And, I think back to it. And that was happening to me at Raytheon. I remember, these young people come in, they get fast tracked and, right off the bat, they get put into really cool programs for leadership development. And so, there I'd be watching the rest of these young people moving forward. And I think it was because I was categorized as an older worker. Craig has a question. Craig says, Toddi, when you say working, are you saying employed with a corporate entity or working in general? Craig, I would say working in general, basically making a paycheck. To me, work is work, and it doesn't matter whether it comes from, a contract gig, from your own business, whether you're working for a company, but it does definitely get harder to get a full-time regular job the older you get. At least that's been my experience. And I was unemployed as of basically the end of October. It took me 4 months to find a job again. So that's never happened. It would have taken me 4 days in the past. So, Becky, what's your experience been?
Boy, and I've just started to see that trend more so, and you don't want to jump to that, but I do think there is some commonalities there. My oldest daughter is 21 years old, and she's joining the workforce, and it's like, oh my God, like just to look at our comparison, I feel like she's right there with me. So it's interesting, and I think it's important to evaluate that. So, and then we have a couple other questions here too. Oh, Kim says, depends on what you mean by work. Making a contribution is part of what makes, yep.
Yeah.
Did you see that, Todd?
And for me, I mean, I've always, so I'm hanging out in a hotel in Los Angeles, guys. I've been here in LA this week, attending some fan events, which are kind of fun. And I was yesterday on the Warner Brothers studio lots, and I was thinking to myself, I would love to come and work for a year, like on a studio lot. So again, it's about making a contribution, doing something you love. I mean, I think that's something that we all look for is, how do we find that meaningful work? I mean, is it necessarily something that keeps us in the manner that we've become accustomed to? Or is it just making that contribution and feeling like we're doing something? I mean, what do you think?
And Toddi, real quick, I'm going to share that article that you referenced earlier too. I'll share that in the chat real quick.
Okay.
Not necessarily for now, but it's a good read for later.
It is. There's actually a lot of, okay, so this article, and I had sent it actually last night to Becky, it talks about older workers in the job force, but it also has a lot of jump off points on that same article, so we can talk about those later. But I think it's really interesting. It gives a lot of statistics, the ones that I talked about earlier, in terms of, that increase in people staying in the workforce. And the questions are why. I mean, like, why are we staying in the workforce? Is it because we don't want to be bored? So Marco says that, work is something that doesn't have to be boring. And I completely agree. I don't know if I could not work, honestly. I mean, I just don't know if I could do that. There are people who stay in the workforce because they haven't built up enough retirement. Because, I mean, so my husband is a pensioner and I am not a pensioner. So I'm one of those people that, if I was not married to my spouse, I might be scrambling and thinking maybe that I needed to be working until I'm in at least my mid 60s to be building up retirement funds. So that's one of the reasons that people are staying in the workforce. What, we're all living longer. And the dichotomy of this for me is the longer we live, the more the workforce gets automated. So that's the real challenge. So how do we stay relevant in the workforce? Do we stay relevant by looking for work that's really just about, making sure that we feel satisfied, or is it all about making money? Is it about sustaining our lifestyle? Just it's kind of an interesting question, but it's to me, we're a workforce that needs to be paid attention to, probably as much as the millennials or Gen Z or anybody else. I mean, if we stay in that workforce, what kinds of accommodations do we need? Do we need part-time work? Those are questions I have. I mean, like, is anybody going to be willing to work with us on a part-time basis? My husband actually has that option, by the way, which I think is really cool. His company, people get to be 65 and they go part-time and they stay. There's one guy in his workplace that's over 80. And I'm like, that's cool. So that's it to me that his company has a really great mindset. All right. Kim, your question is, why is that an or? Okay, well, I mean, that's a good question. Why is it an or is there, I mean, how do we think about this? And have we really thought about it? Are we really thinking right now, do we have to work? Do we want to work? Do we want to have a voice in the workplace? I mean, how much do you feel like people that look like us have a voice in the workplace about, how we define what work means to us? I don't think we do, and I haven't seen a lot written on it. So maybe that's something that we all need to kind of dive into and start writing more about. I'm not ready to roll over yet. I'm still running, I'm still working, I'm still doing things, but what do I need in the workforce? And does that need to be defined out by the employer or a client if you're working with somebody who's your direct client? Oh, Becky, I'll let you comment. I know you can see everything. It's hard to keep up with everything.
I know. There's a lot going on. Sounds good. I keep talking back and between the mute and the boy, I'm not.
Yeah, Kim says fulfillment and needing the dollar. So why isn't it an or? It doesn't have to be. Sometimes they go hand in hand together. I mean, quite frankly, I think we need to feed our brain as much as we need to feed our pocketbook. That's just my opinion. I mean, I think you can have a real deficit if you're not getting that input on a regular basis and you're not challenged.
No, that makes sense. I know in Kim's question, that same thing, the fulfillment and needing the, I met with a dean recently of a Colorado institution here recently, and she was talking about that. We were talking about career, and she's at I'm 47, we're at the same age level, and she asked that same thing, where's that balance? So I think this is a time in our lives when we're really looking for that balance too, and trying to find that. And what did Marco say? Usually yes, but what do you have with money? Sorry, I'm trying to keep up. And I think so much of it, and this is just a basic observation in my own life, is to be careful of the assumptions, that for myself, I'm like, okay, millennials, and to not categorize ourselves within, younger, innovative, older, experience, that there's values between each of those. So older generation can be innovative, and younger can bring different, experiences as well and different perspectives. So not to generalize.
Okay. Well, and actually, I think it's a really important point. Dana says older workers have so much that we bring to the table that needs to be captured. That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. Dana says the older workers need to go visit the knowledge management department once a week. So the war stories, war stories can be recorded. But that's, also the tribal knowledge. I mean, the things that we carry with us that we'll be leaving when we leave and if we leave. And there's a lot of studies out there that say that right now we're filling in the gaps, things that are not, that people are bringing to the table when they get out of college. I mean, and there's so much experience that we have that, brand new employees out of college don't have. But we've got a lot of management experience. We've had a lot of experience working in project management. I mean, I don't know a lot of college students that come in with project management experience. Maybe if they've been exposed to things like PMI in college and things like that. But like that was one of the things that, whenever somebody asks me, like, what kind of information do you have that, somebody else might not have? It's like, oh my gosh, I have managed multi-million-dollar development projects, on my own, and that's not to credit myself, but to say, like I've been able to, figure out what budget over here pays for this and what budget over here pays for this, and where are we going to run behind and where are we running late, and who do I go talk to in management to say, hey, we're up against this deadline. Those are the kinds of things you're not going to get with somebody who just comes in, straight out from college. They just don't have it. And it's not a slam. They just don't have it.
But yeah, project management course is not the same as the tactical of working through those problem-solving pieces and working with different departments and so forth. So I hear you. And then Toddi, there's a fair amount coming in on the chat side that you probably see.
Yeah, everybody. So just to let you know, everybody they go down their side paths a lot of times. Sometimes we talk about music on the side, which is really interesting. Other times we end up, like talking like totally on point, but I'm seeing a lot of on point conversation.
Yes.
So Luis says he's curious about the difference between the shift in what boomers and Gen X have experienced working jobs long term versus millennials and Gen Z in the gig economy. And that's actually a really interesting question. Now, for people like Becky and I think, well, and actually with Steve when he comes on, so I'm kind of monitoring to see when he jumps on because he'll let me know. We've all worked a lot of gigs. So, I don't know about you, Becky, but I've done probably more gig work in the last 4 years, probably than I cared to do, actually. But I think we do have that experience that we can kind of speak to, at least understand what millennials are experiencing in the workforce, because they really have a gig mentality, I think, coming into it. They walk in, most millennials, I think, come in thinking that they're going to probably work 3 or 4 years in a job. And it used to be that you would come in and you'd stay for 10 years, and then it started to get to the point where, management was saying to us, hey, if you're in a job for 5 years, you probably need to consider moving on. That's probably where you should start doing more professional development. But for me, it's been a lot of gig work. Sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years. So I have that experience, and I don't know that it's the best way to, necessarily be when you get to be my age, but it's also been really good for me to go out and get new skill sets. And that's something that I wanted to talk about too is, what kinds of things can we do to keep ourselves current in terms of skill sets? So does that gig economy mentality kind of help us? Or is it hurting us? I don't think it's hurting us. I think that, when we start to learn more each time, even though we feel like we're drinking from the fire hose, I think we're learning skill sets and new technologies and things that are going to keep us more relevant in the workplace.
Wow, I think you hit something big there, Toddi, because my daughter came home for a Christmas break. She was had an internship abroad for her senior year and came home, and she picked up work on Freelancer, writing blogs. And and I don't want to generalize, but you really hit on something that I've seen where it's like, oh, they are used to that gig mentality. And then while I'm looking for something permanent, I do look back at different skill sets that I've picked up on from the gig mentality, from doing a gig or here, there. Oh, well, what software do I need for this project? And then you learn that, and then hopefully that adds to the next, but then the consistency. So it's always a balance.
Right.
Sorry, I'm.
Oh, that's okay. So the question I have is, are you happy doing gig work, or would you prefer to be a full-time worker? Are you looking for something that full-time work would offer versus gig work, or?
And are you sending that out to everyone?
Yeah. And since you're right there in the screen, yes. I'm just curious.
No, that sounds good. I'm looking for permanent, but I think I've found, as you mentioned, a lot of benefits from doing the gig work. So increased skill set in areas that I didn't realize that I needed to improve upon. So I think that's been helpful. And I'm wondering too, in my field, and I think this reaches probably to a lot of you, that I present myself as, I'm ed tech and ed tech integration. My dissertation is on Twitter-based teacher education PLNs, so a collaborative learning environment like this. And I just wonder, and it could be my own assumption again, But I just wonder if, 47-year-old saying, oh, how are you using technology? If it comes across the same way as a millennial. But that's a side point too.
Well, experience is experience. I mean, I've gone and I was telling you guys, it took me 4 months to find a job. And it was a bizarre experience actually for me compared to what I was used to in the past, especially with gig work. I would find that I would have somebody who wanted to, they wanted to do a pre-screen. Okay, all right, we'll do the pre-screen. Then you'd have an interview with, somebody on the phone with 2 or 3 people. Then the next step might be to come in person. And I did find that, and this was something that I spoke about when we had another panel a couple of weeks ago. I ended up interviewing with a lot of men in a lot of the places that I went to, like literally no women in the companies. They would ask me questions about my experience. I'd start talking about having done really cool alternative reality or virtual reality, and you could just see their eyes glaze over, like, oh my God, she's done these cool projects. She's going to be bored here. But I'd end up with these interviews, and some of them were phone interviews. The next question was portfolio. And by the way, Becky and you and I need to talk because I'm working on a class right now where I'm working on a PLN project. PLN is Personal Learning Network, if anybody wants to find out. And so, the next thing I know, I would send over my portfolio. I kind of tailored portfolio for them for things that they wanted to see. If it was technical, if it was management training, I send that over. And then the next request I would get back would be like, hey, we want you to go do this now. Here's your assignment. We want to see what you produced just for the moment. You've got 2 or 3 days and get this back to us. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is not the traditional hiring process that I was used to. And I'm really okay with showing what I've done, with showing my work, with showing portfolios. But it just felt like every time I get to some, next step, there'd be another hurdle. And I don't know if this is something that's happening overall in the workplace or if it's happening because, of what I call the silver ceiling, where somebody really wants to prove that I'm cool enough that I can do the kinds of cool projects that they're currently doing in their workplace. That's in a traditional hiring scenario. I did have a couple of interviews to do some more consulting-based work, and I didn't have that kind of perception, which was interesting because people would come to me and perceive me as being the expert who was going to tell them who was, what they were going to do or what they should do in their projects. And I've got a couple of side things I'm still working on right now to do some consulting, and I feel more comfortable in that realm. I feel like my experience is more respected, but it's just been really, really interesting to me to see how things are going. And so, there are some things I think we can do in our searches or in, our work out there looking for consulting work that can maybe put us in a better position. We can kind of jockey for position in terms of overcoming that age. I mean, how can we capitalize on that? Can we say we've got, experience that people don't necessarily have just coming out of college? What are the challenges here? And why is it a problem for us being older? Is it because we're more expensive? And I think that's one of the big things I'm finding in the market is people assume that I'm just more expensive when I walk in the door because I've had so much experience. Anybody else had that experience at all? I'm actually reading through some of the comments here. I know, catching up here. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, and so when we get back to what can we do in the workplace to position ourselves, so we might be considered more expensive. I know that, if somebody looks at my resume and they say 15 years of experience and I've worked in virtual reality, I've managed projects, I think the assumption immediately is that I'm going to be a more expensive hire, that I might be bored in the workplace. So what kinds of things can we do to overcome that? How can we get past that? I've adjusted my resume. I've actually finally started to take things off. I'm a little more targeted in my resume. I don't put everything on there. I don't feel compelled to necessarily have a chronological order that shows that I didn't work or that I did continue working. I've dropped off my dates on almost everything, and that drives me crazy, by the way. ATS systems require you to put dates on everything. And I feel like that's one way that, companies can definitely discriminate against us. is, I go in, I fill out an application, I have to verify my previous employee, I have to verify their employer, I have to verify dates and how does everybody feel about it? I feel kind of weird about it when I'm forced to put dates into an ATS system or disclose to somebody.
That's interesting, and I haven't done that with my resume, so I'll have to check that out. And Toddi, if it's okay, I'm going to read off some of these too in response. Absolutely. As we go. Marco comments, as an older worker, I'm reassuringly expensive. Smiley face.
Marco, he knows his stuff.
Craig says, I do feel like I'm locked into where I am unless I want to take less money right now. That's relatable for me right now.
That's interesting.
Marco, for me as an employer, I find that it's not that older workers are more expensive. It's that they are actually less flexible and open to change. Just my experience. And then,
hey, Marco, are you willing to jump on and talk to us about that? I think that's really interesting because I don't think of myself as being inflexible at all. Of course, I'm gonna tell you, I am not inflexible, but I don't feel like that's how I am. I think, and maybe I have a different mindset. I am always willing to learn, and Becky, I know you are too. You were just asking me about some tools the other day. How do you learn about new tools? How do you keep up to date? And that's really one of the more important things in the workplace when you're an older worker, is staying up to date. Oh, okay. Marco, I'm going to send you an invite. Hang on a second here. I'm really curious about that. That's a comment I haven't heard. Hang on. Let me find you. There we go. All right. We'll get Marco on. Becky, I might have lost you, but you're still there. There's Marco.
Hey, Toddi.
Hi, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
I think it's really interesting what you're saying. That's why I brought you on. I'm going to bring Becky on too. And oh, there you are. You're back on. So it's interesting. I've actually worked with all of you guys, by the way. So I'm just going to make it a habit. I'm going to go out and work with everybody in our group. But Marco, I'm really curious if you would speak to that for me, because that's not really something that I would ever think about in terms of hiring older workors, is that they're inflexible. So I'm curious on your perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's a few things. I don't know if that echoes your end or my end.
Let me mute on my end. Hang on.
Okay, cool. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. So you can hear me. So I think it's a couple of things, and I find it increasingly more and more with older workers, in that they are, I won't say less flexible is an interesting word. There is a less flexibility, but it is more that they are set in their ways. So when you're looking to drive change, and in our industry, certainly in learning and education, change for me is every day. It's almost every day. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you need to change every day, but actually, we will have a conversation. I will have a conversation every single day with my team and teams about what is new, and should we consider exploring it or implementing it, or just doing it, if you like. And it's interesting with younger people. They just go with it. You give them a new app and say, right, we're going to try this. They'll just do it. You give it to an older person and they'll go, oh, but we've always done it this way. Or we've done it this way for the last 12 months. Why do we need to change now? Now, of course, you can build in all the rationale. It's just actually the obstruction to actually looking to do that change. And I find increasingly I have to have a conversation in around, and I always use a sports analogy. So football. The fact that in football, you change whoever you're up against, you will change your tactics to play against those opponents. And tactics one week will be different than the following week. So for me, business is more and more like that. And it's actually about thinking like business. So as opposed to, here's my job description. This is what I'm meant to do. This is what you're paid for. And you will turn up every single day to do that. I think whilst for me, I look at the job description as the framework. So, we've discussed before about multi-skills. For me, it's the framework, it's the guidelines, if you like. But you know what? You might do things or be asked to do things that are not in that job description, and it evolves over time. So, but also, so that's more from the, I suppose, the actual physical work side. I think what also comes into play, and where I get the challenge, is in around, older people typically have more responsibilities. So, that comes into play. It's a bit like saying, hey, I'd like you to go to the US for a week. And they go, oh, I can't really do that because I've got to do childcare, or my wife's at work, or my husband's at work, or whatever. Whereas you might ask a younger person who's yet to have all those responsibilities, and they'll go, which airport? So that comes in.
For just a second, I think that's an interesting thing too. I guess I never really think about that kind of thing, and that's where I need to develop more of a world perspective. Like, who am I up against? Do they have families? Do they have responsibilities? Can they just like take off? I mean, and I think that's probably why we do see so many young people in sales, because they are flexible that way. I ran into a guy at ATD who was in his 20s, and so he basically leased a fast car. And started doing sales in the US. And instead of going to the airports, he would drive between every location because he was young and hip and he could do that. He didn't have a family, and he had leased a really cool, I think it was a Lamborghini actually. So, he kind of capitalized on that. And is that something that you or I could do? Marco would. But, I mean, again, is that a reasonable thing? And what needs to be done? And are employers or even customers willing to accommodate us as we become older people in the workforce? I mean, what do you guys think? I'm going to go on mute so you can talk again.
Becky, I'll let you go.
Sounds good, guys. And I broke out for a little bit. So Marco, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to defer to you first.
Okay, that's fine. I think fundamentally, we're in a new world. We're absolutely in a new world of work. We talk a lot about, and I have a good friend who actually does a lot of gigs, speaking gigs in relation to the future of work. And I actually think the future of work is here now. And of course, a lot of people will talk about the future work in relation to technology. So they'll talk about AI and VR and blockchain, et cetera, all stuff that I get involved with and totally fascinated by. But I actually think the future of work is in and around flexibility. So home worker or office, virtual teams or real teams, virtual meetings as opposed to face-to-face meetings, and I just use those as easy examples because they're things that probably all of us are doing every single day. That's what I was only having the conversation just last week with a good friend of mine who works for a big multinational here in the UK. And as a business, they employ something like 150,000 people, I think, the biggest telecoms firm here in the UK. And he's a senior manager, and he was talking to me about the fact that they have adopted and are applying agile methodology to their business. And what he then said, and I said, that's brilliant, that's great, I'm a big fan of that. And then he said to me, but as a prerequisite, we have to go to the office every single day. Now, the office for him is actually an hour away. So he has to go an hour there, an hour back. And we delved into that deeper. And I said to him, so Steve, are you, the hour that you're traveling there and the hour back, are you doing that outside your contracted hours or inside? And he goes, definitely inside my hours. So I just looked at him and said, that's not agile. That's not being agile at all. That's actually defeating the whole purpose of agile. So it's interesting, whilst there are companies, it's the classic example, a company, jumps on to something, grasps it, wants to implement it, and that's great. They actually haven't thought it through, or actually probably in this instance, they've had some very highly paid PwC consultants who've looked up and said, this is what you need to do. It's a bit like smart offices. Whoever invented smart offices needs to be put against a wall and shot, in my opinion. Because I don't know if anyone's worked in one, but I have, or I've been in. I've not worked in it, but I've been and visited them. And how you can have an informal chat or conversation or meeting with somebody by their desks is beyond me, because it's just such a noisy environment. So for me, long-winded story, sorry, context probably has helped. But for me, it's about, we need to look at, and you said it, Toddi, it made me think actually when you said, I need to think, I think what you're trying to say is you actually need to think, or we need to think more tactically. You know, if we're going for a role, a contract or a job, who are we up against? What are they bringing to the table as opposed to what we're bringing? We have to do more, and I've discussed this before. You know, the CV for me doesn't count anymore. You know, there are things I look for, but I'm not looking for qualifications. I'm not necessarily looking for masses of experience. I'm looking for key identifiers. The CV, I suppose, just sort of gets you to the table. It's more about the other things that you bring. So whereas before we could just fly in our CVs and then get a phone call and say, hey, yes, you can come in for the interview. I think we've moved on from that now. So what are the tactics? You know, assessing who we might be up against and what they're bringing to the party. And I actually do believe, and I know we're talking age here, but I do wonder if that age thing will start to be broken down, and because we've seen it in CVs. You know, you don't put your date of birth on your CV anymore. It's sort of, you know, it's illegal to ask somebody their age. So, you know, what we want is key behaviors of the people that we're going to work with.
I'll go off mute again.
Excellent. Oh, sorry. I think you brought out some key points, Marco, and I was jotting notes as crazy. So earlier, Toddi, your reflection on the story, the scenario that you provided, I think that's such a combination of like weighing the risk that younger workers probably are able to provide, you know, risk versus responsibilities that Marco presented. And then Marco, I really want to circle back to that piece on being tactical. I think I've been at a point this last year where then I'm less tactical because I'm like, oh, you know, okay, I have an opportunity here. I have to jump on it. And so I've lost that leverage, or I've allowed myself to give up that leverage. So that's very helpful.
Again here too. Yeah, so it's interesting to think in terms of being tactical on looking for work. I mean, whether that's in an employer scenario or with a consulting, you know, client or something like that, and thinking about who our competitors are, because I don't think I've really thought about it except to know that, oh, you know, I've thrown in my CV. You know, somebody went to LinkedIn, they looked at my photo online, and about 3 years ago, I said, okay, enough is enough. You know, I've got silver and I'm not going to hide it anymore. So I changed my photo on my LinkedIn, on my profile, you know, and that's where my mindset is every time I throw out that CV and hope to get past gate one, is what does my LinkedIn profile say about me? What does my CV say about me? Well, my resume says, good God, she's been in this field for 25 years. That's probably the first thing it says, because I have done so many things and I've had so many opportunities. And I'm guilty of wanting to show somebody what I'm capable of rather than being more targeted and saying, okay, this job requires these skills and I should, you know, take out half of what's on my resume and move more tactical that way. And I think those are things that we can definitely do. You know, instead I'm thinking, okay, how much can I put out there? How can I compete? And so maybe it is a thought of, you know, maybe we need to kind of bring that in and think more in a tactical level when we're putting out the resume. You know, it's like, and, you know, I've asked myself a zillion times too, should I have a different photo on my LinkedIn? I mean, that's a very humbling thing when you get to that point and you realize, you know, I mean, there's certain things you can't change. I always tell my husband, I can color my hair, but I can't get rid of the wrinkles. You know, I certainly can't get rid of the level of experience that it's kind of clear that I have on my resume. You know, so how do you hide those things, or how do you get around them, or how do you make those things a desirable thing versus, go ahead, Marco, you're on. I'm gonna.
Yeah. So no, I'm just going to jump in there. So, and it's a great point you mentioned, the fact you mentioned the photos. And it's been a bugbear of mine for probably 2 years. And I actually, when I'm at conferences, I call people out, and invariably I end up calling the ladies out. So forgive me. Although I have, to be fair, there are some men who do this as well. But the photos that I see on LinkedIn or Twitter, professional type platforms, and women, not all women, but a proportion of women do this. Their photos are 10, 20 years ago. And what that does, so here's, and I'm a, as everybody knows, I'm very pro feminist, and I would love to employ even more women. It's just we don't have as many women coding yet as we would like. But one thing I do, if I get a CV with a photo, or whether it's a LinkedIn profile, somebody approaches me and the photo is of a person and it's a dated photo, and I mean dated by 10 or 20 years, they don't even get across my door. And the reason they don't get across my door is I look at that and I understand the reasons why it's done. Don't get me wrong, I do understand the reasons. But for me, it's about authenticity and credibility. And if you are unwilling to embrace your age and your wrinkles, and in your case, Toddi, and I love it, by the way, the silver, then there is something lacking within you to be able to do that. And my thinking is, be loud, be proud. If you are really skilled at your job, it shouldn't matter what your appearance is. You could have 2 heads for all I'm concerned. You could have 4 arms. In fact, if you were a coder and you had 4 arms, I'd be paying you big bucks. But my point is the authenticity and the credibility. And if you're hiding behind that, then there's for me, there's something inside lacking within you, and therefore I am never going to ever get the best out of you as a team, as a colleague.
Toggling in. So we're really kind of getting into the psychology of that, which I think is fascinating. Because you're looking at what does it say about a person when they're not willing to own up to their experience, their age. I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm really, really proud of the company that my husband works for. He works for an engineering company, and people in his workplace will get beyond 65, beyond 70, literally. And then they start working part-time. They might travel to India every other month, and there are people that he's worked with who have done that. And his company actually embraces them. I mean, like, some of these folks have gone on safari, I'm not kidding. While they're still working part-time, they'll do call-ins. They still support the workplace. They support it in an agile methodology. They make no bones about who they are and the fact that it's really important to them to travel, but they have so much knowledge. I mean, like, these are MIT kinds of guys. The brain power that they carry in their heads is amazing. And so they stay in the workforce, and the company has accommodated them that way. There was one guy that literally, he was traveling every other month on a 2-week safari, or a trip to India, or a trip to the Caribbean, and I'm like, that is so cool. And I wish more companies would realize that that they can retain that knowledge that they need to keep by treating people in such a way that it gives them that flexibility. And again, they're a more agile company too. Anyway, let me jump off here. So Becky looks like she has something to say.
I'm slow on the toggle mute, but no, I'm actually reading through the sidebar, and awesome conversation in there too. So.
Just going back to the tactics, the tactical element of it, and for me, as I said, I believe it's the sort of the future of work right now. And it shouldn't be something that's alien to us. And you referenced salespeople earlier, Toddi. Salespeople use tactics when they are trying to land deals. They are genning up on the competition. Who else might be pitching for that business? Who is in that team pitching for that particular vendor? What is the features and the benefits of that particular product? And I think for us as individuals, we're a product. We're selling ourselves, and it's we need to up our game in our tactics of how we sell ourselves. And when I interview, I have this little test with people, and I don't have a pair with me, but the best one I've ever seen was a guy, and I employed him on the spot, and I gave him a pair of sunglasses, and I said to him, sell these sunglasses to me. And he picked up the sunglasses, and he just held them, and he got out his mobile phone, and I'll just do this, and maybe I can do this on the screen. And he got his mobile phone in his camera, and he just leant across the table, and he stuck it right in my face like this, and he goes, now you need and I did this, and he goes, now you need the sunglasses. And I thought, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And that was his line of how he could sell those sunglasses to me. And he thought that off the top of his head, he applied it straight away. But that for me was the speed of thought, the ingenuity in behind it. I was expecting him to do what most people do, which is the features and benefits, how it was made, and all, which is relevant and right and all fine. But that for me was, I thought, this is the kind of guy I want to work with. But so, I use that as context as the story, but it's about the tactics, actually. And of course, the tactic in that particular instance was he actually got right in my face. But it worked, that appealed to me.
And Marco, I think that's an awesome story. And I think that brings together two recurring themes that I continue to see. And that's throughout this conversation, agility and experience. And maybe as experienced workers, we need to prove that we're agile, while also showcasing our experience as a positive. And I don't know if that's it, but those feel like the two nuggets to me that I see in my life.
Totally agree. I think, experience is to be celebrated. And I put in the chat earlier, tacit knowledge, older people have, and somebody referenced it as war stories, and they can be called war stories, but there's actually war stories. But actually there's also, it's actually about, to do a lot of jobs, there's a process and there's a step in that process, and we all follow it. It's a bit like creating articulate storyline e-learning, for example. But experienced people, older people who will have done it thousands of times or hundreds of times, they'll know the shortcuts. They'll know the little tips or the little plugins or that sort of thing. So as opposed to maybe taking 2 hours to create a half an hour course, they might do it in an hour. So as a business owner, from a productivity perspective, if the quality of work is comparable, whether you took an hour or 2 hours, as a business owner, you want that, because that's about margin. That's about the fact they only took an hour as opposed to 2 hours. But that's experience and knowledge, and that's the tacit knowledge. And of course, when they leave and go out the door, nobody documents that. That's not documented. That's not put down in a manual or a how-to guide. That goes out the door with them. And then all of a sudden, to create that hour of e-learning takes everybody else 2 hours, where you have this person taking an hour. That's crucial to business.
Okay, I'm toggled back on again. Yeah, and I think that's one of the really important things. I mean, we're losing a lot of that tribal knowledge, and we, as older workers, can fill in the gaps in a lot of areas. I mean, I think that's something that maybe we need to start selling ourselves on. Maybe my tagline, on my LinkedIn profile needs to say, that I bring to the table, a tribal knowledge, or I bring in experience that others may not have. Not to say that they don't have experience, but somebody who's, in their 20s just coming out of college probably doesn't have the experience that I do. And, I've never really thought about, can I tactically craft my story to say that I am an older worker and that I really can come in and I've done it, or, I might have some perspective on how to do it again, but somebody else might not. I just think it's extremely interesting to know that we're still here, and we're still here because of what you're saying, that this is the future work and this is happening right now. We're here because we do have knowledge that, you know, we need to hang on to. You know, this is why the guy that's almost 80 in my husband's office is still there, is because the knowledge that he has is still really relevant and really needed. And I think that's interesting. And I don't know if he has a LinkedIn profile. I have no idea. I mean, it's a new world. We're all, you know, in that social media realm where we feel like we have to be out there. And so what's the story that we're telling? I mean, and thank you, Mark, for saying it's cool that, you know, I'm running around with my silver hair and being authentic, because for a few years ago, I decided I'm not going to be somebody that I'm not, you know, and I've had this experience, by the way, recently in looking for work. I'm not going to go in with a different color of hair. I'm not going to tell somebody that I haven't done AR or VR work. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to pretend to be stupid. You know, if it basically gets me excused and shown the door, I'm okay with that. Oh, okay. Craig let me know that we're coming up on.
Yeah, we're coming on the 5-minute mark.
Okay. I'm not going to be somebody that I'm not. And so that's one of the things that I decided a while ago, and that's why I did take on the contract work that I'm doing right now, because they made a decision on me based on one phone interview. One, they said they were agile, they proved it. I'm like, all right, so I really like it, and it's kind of non-native for me. I'm having to learn some new things in this role, things that I've either worked with a long time ago or I'm coming back to. But, you know, I was really impressed by the fact that they were willing to take me on with, you know, just basically one conversation, one person making the decision. I'm like, that is exactly how I like to see things work. I like someone to be able to make a decision. And they made a decision for me, and I was like, boom, we're good. I'm not going to entertain anything else. So anyway, yeah, we are coming up on that 5-minute mark. Guys, I'm going to open it back up to you to say whatever you need to say, and then we'll get ready to close out.
I just want to say a quick thank you. This was awesome, and I so appreciate the opportunity and learned so much from each of us, so thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Great to meet you online. Toddi, I've known before. So, and everybody in the chat, as always, it's great. Just one final thought, if you like, Toddi, just picking up on something that when you were talking then in your narrative, you mentioned the words experience, knowledge. And I think we have to be very careful in the language we also use, both on our CVs, but also when we are, you know, pitching ourselves or marketing, or whether that's marketing the solutions that we're creating in-house or out of house. And it's just the two words there you used, experience and knowledge. And again, this is just my opinion, so it's just coming from my side. You know, I'm more interested in knowledgeable people as opposed to necessarily experienced, because they give me two different connotations. But of course, it might be different for different people. So I think it's, again, just about making sure we select the right language at the right time, because they could have two different, whilst they feel like they're the same, they might have a different connotation to different people.
Mm-hmm. Right. Am I on? Okay, yeah, no, I think that's a really valid point. And so that's something that, you know, maybe my story needs to be about knowledge. Maybe all of our stories need to be about knowledge versus experience. Yeah. Well, experience is important. So Becky, I just saw in the sidebar, you said you wanted to capture everything in the sidebar. So you can actually get those. I think Luis can actually download this for you. And again, and Craig, do you mind putting up the link for the Slack? Because these are conversations we can continue in our Slack. So, and these are things that Becky doesn't know because she's brand new.
I know. Thank you. Thank you for the
we have a Slack team that we actually, we can all go in and ask for help from each other or ask for opinions on different things that we're doing. There's a Slack channel. So we'll continue on. I mean, I think, Luis, if you don't mind, we can actually throw up a Slack channel to talk about maybe some of the things. I don't know if I want to call it the silver ceiling or I don't know. But it's something that's really relevant, I think, for a lot of us. You know, they say over 40. You know, so over 40 is a whole bunch of us in this group. You know, that's starting to happen to a lot of us. Silver surfer. All right. I'm right near the Pacific right now. So guys, I'm sorry if there was an echo today. You'll laugh because I borrowed my son's Xbox headphones, and when I went to put them on, realized that there was no headset. They're just earphones. So I had a bit of an equipment hiccup today, but we managed. So, and again, I wanted to tell everybody we are brought today and this week by Designing Digitally, which is Andrew's team, and they do some amazing work. If you have work that anybody needs to contract out, I would highly recommend talking to them. There's not anything that they can't do. I mean, they do some really great work. We have so many amazing people in this group. I would encourage you all to think about becoming a permanent member of TLDC. I did that last year, and I'll tell you what, this has been the most amazing experience for me to get to know all of these folks who are like me, because I didn't know that, you know, all of these people existed out there. So it's been great to talk about this today. I'm hoping we can continue the conversation. Becky, thank you so much for jumping in.
Thank you. Thanks to each of you.
And membership, Craig put the membership link in here too.
Awesome.
We did our first conference in January down in Phoenix. So we actually had a couple hundred people show up down at Galvanize in Phoenix. We had a 2-day-long conference. We get to meet each other in person. We've all kind of become friends, and even through the chats, we've gotten to know each other really well. But this is great. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it. Maybe I'll start writing on it. Wow. Anyway, so welcome, and everybody, thank you. Have a great day, and take care. Bye-bye.